to the Pastor Therapist Podcast. My name is Jeremiah, a local therapist here in Texas.
And I am Terry, a pastor here in the heart of Texas.
Man, we're so happy that you joined us. But before we get started, he is not your pastor. I'm not your therapist, but we do want to continue to have those conversations that we commonly have either at your local church or on a therapist's couch.
Yes, sir.
And today we want to talk about anger. Anger, that strong emotion that we all experience.
No man can escape.
No man can escape.
Or woman.
We all experience. That's right.
Yeah.
Or woman. One of the things I think about as it relates to anger is like, because it's such a strong emotion, it's a big alert. One of those things that, is like almost like an alarm. And I think about, at home when I'm cooking and I'm doing a little bit too much, if you will. And that smoke alarm
Chef
starts to
Boyardee,
go off.
Homeboy, Chef Boyardee, homeboy. Yeah.
That's what I think I am, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then that alarm goes off. And the first thing I do, instead of, turning the flame down, is I go and try to fan the smoke alarm so that the fire department don't come or that the neighbors don't call 911, right?
Yep.
But the thing about that is that it's not the smoke alarm that's the issue. It's that I'm not, taming the fire, right?
Are you sure it's not the smoke alarm, man? Because
it feels like
if you listen close enough, I got a little beep in the hallway right now that my wife in the middle of the night keeps bringing up to me to change out that battery.
Hey, man, you leaning into some stereotypes right now, but you leave that alone.
Yeah.
But it's not the smoke alarm. It's the cooking. It's that thing in the background that's really going on. And anger is much of the same in that it's not anger itself. A lot of times it's what's underneath anger that's driving it, that's causing the alarms. You know what I mean?
I agree. It's like that, that famous commercial that they used to have back in the day, the Snickers commercial, where somebody would be acting out of character a little bit and then somebody would hand them a Snickers and be like, you're not yourself when you're hungry, and then once they bit that Snicker, they changed back into their normal self. So that's exactly what I think about when I hear anger and what you're describing with that underlying issue that's going on that's driving it.
Right. Yeah. What anger really is what we call a secondary emotion. It could be sometimes a primary emotion, but a secondary emotion, which basically means it kind of protects a deeper emotion. It protects, sometimes feelings of shame or guilt, embarrassment even. And it sort of keeps things at an arm's length, but it also gives us the energy to cease a threat or to uncover or to protect those unmet needs or hurts.
The thing that we're seeing that's important to us, right? To protect that thing that we feel that's important. Or I've heard a man talk about that anger is when something that we think is important is not the way it's supposed to be, and that's what can also produce that anger. Yeah. Did you know? Now, in this moment, you should have, that commercial with the "Did you know?" flashes across the screen. Did you know that in the Bible, anger is mentioned over 500 times, and it's mentioned, the only emotion that is mentioned more than anger is love. So that's how important anger is within the Bible. In the beginning of Genesis chapter 4 with Cain, anger is mentioned. And even in the book of Revelation, anger is mentioned again. So, and all in between, it's constantly brought up.
That's right. From Genesis to Revelation, and one thing I forgot to add on is that anger also highlights a perceived injustice in us, right?
That's good.
Yeah, and so it makes sense that it's very evident throughout the scriptures.
Every time you're angry, you broadcast what matters to you.
Right. Yeah. What matters to you, what's important to you. Now, sometimes in that, there can be some like what we would think about how we perceive anger, because it is such a strong emotion and sometimes it gets a lot of us in trouble. There could be some misunderstandings about what anger is. Like it always has this connotation that it's bad, but you're right. Sometimes it's just about what we find value in or what we find important is being sometimes overlooked or we're offended.
Yeah. In the scriptures as well, we we think that it's a sin, right? Just like the word pride. When we hear pride, we automatically sometimes go to thinking that, oh, there's something wrong here. But there's actually good pride that we can have, and there's also good anger that we can have.
Yeah,
but
of course. Yeah.
In the scriptures, we know Paul, he mentions that, be angry and sin not, and don't let the what is the word I'm looking for?
Sun.
I just drew a blank. Yeah, the sun go down on your anger and give opportunity to the devil. And so he's mentioning this line that's there, that we could have a good anger, but if we're not careful, we could easily tilt over into where it is sinful. And of course, we commonly use the one about, Jesus being angry and flipping over tables.
Right.
And people often use that as, an excuse for their anger, for unhinged type of anger.
That's right. Yeah,
but Jesus had a very controlled anger, and it was a good type of anger, a righteous anger. And so it's a lot different than the anger that we try to tie it to and associate with our bad anger that we're expressing.
Right. And typically, sometimes with bad anger, what we're doing is we are suppressing it or pushing it down. And it's like a pressure cooker, right? If you don't ever vent that thing, it could be explosive. Like you said, unhinged, if you will.
Yeah. Startling,
Right.
Just like with the pressure cooker. If people don't know it, I used to do people dirty. They'd be sitting right there by the pressure cooker. If they've never had one before, I'll flip that, flip that switch, and they get startled by the steam that's coming out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Even that steam has some heat behind it. You got to be careful. Yeah. That venting. Right. But anger also can be good. It once again, it highlights a perceived injustice. And so, like you said earlier, it highlights or broadcasts something that's important to us, right? And so if we are mindful about what we're angry about, we can exercise it in a way that we can advocate for ourselves, or we can find resolution to situations that need to be resolved. And so, this thing that we commonly associate as bad actually has some good proponents, healthy components to it. It helps us to engage, even if we're careful.
It does. I agree with that. It does. But my problem is that, I often look at myself when I'm angry, right? And it may be, like you said, I think you said it really well, that a justice has been violated. I think that's a good thing, that when we see injustice, there's a part of us that says, hey, no, this isn't right. There's something wrong with this, and it needs to be addressed. My problem is that when I don't slow down, when I don't examine my anger, or like you kind of mentioned already, I'm suppressing it, is that when my anger gets detached from the character of God. We read in the scriptures that how God is angry, or how God gets angry, but it's never detached from his faithfulness, from his tenderness, from his justice, righteous justice, from all those things. And so often I notice that in my anger, when I'm examining it, if it's detached from those things, maybe I started in a good place of my anger being good, but somewhere along the line, it's now tilted into a certain type of self-righteousness where now I'm seeking justice on my own, and it's detached from those characteristics of God that I want connected to my anger, as God and Christ gives us that example. God the Father gives us that example.
Yeah, I hear you. It's like what I'm hearing you saying, it's like for good reason, but bad actions behind it, right? Because there's these boundary violations or these things that we ought to respond to, but the way in which we do it, you know what I mean? If it's not, like you said, representing the character of God, it can, lead to all sorts of problems. Yeah.
In the scriptures as well, Cain, of course, we know his anger went into very dangerous places where he committed murder. But, if we really look at that text, initially, his anger wasn't a bad thing. He should have been angry at really himself, at his own actions. He should have been disappointed or angry in that way at the very beginning, if we look at the root. But it just went off into jealousy and went off into unhealthy places that God never intended for it to be.
Right. In some ways he was, maybe suppressing it or and then that boy.
We don't know, man, but we wonder. Yeah.
Right.
We wonder.
Yeah. But also anger, it has its, like we said, it's really protecting some, what we call primary emotions, protecting some things underneath the surface, almost like a iceberg, right? Where at the top we see the anger, but underneath there's so much happening underneath that, man. And so, like I mentioned, boundary issues, but also sometimes unmet expectations, especially in relationship. If you don't respond the way I hope that you would, it communicates so much more to me than just you weren't there, or you didn't show up, you didn't return my phone call. Something happens inside, and sometimes it's like, man, do I matter? Am I important? And that can, if I don't communicate that, right, or feel safe to communicate anger shows up.
Yeah, I think you said it very well about those unmet expectations. I've again, not only experienced that personally, but seen that a lot. Normally when after the dust settles and you slow somebody down and you're like, hey, why did this make you angry? Oftentimes it comes to an unmet expectation that a lot of times either A, wasn't communicated, or it was communicated on your end, or from your lens, you felt like you communicated it, but the person receiving didn't catch it, and something was lost there. And so you're operating with this understanding between each of you that really isn't there. That person didn't know. They didn't know that was something they should have been doing or not doing. So we got to come back to that point of, hey, okay, let's reattack this. Let's communicate it again. So I like what you said about the unmet expectations, and then even in that unmet expectations, okay, what am I believing right now?
Yeah.
What am I believing to be true or not true? Does this line up with what this person has communicated to me and how they've normally treated me? Like, what's all happening here? What am I believing right now?
That's right. Because it's so easy in those moments of unmet expectations to feel like a slight or a disrespect and those sorts of things. And we can run with that narrative like, man, this person
quick.
don't. Right.
Ball tucked,
Right. Yeah. Right down the line. Yeah. but yeah. And so we miss those opportunities of engagement and resolving because those narratives are now running, especially if that's always been a theme for us throughout life, is that we've been disrespected or ignored or things like that. And so, we could be, for lack of a better word, sensitive to feelings of disrespect. And that'll take us off into that unmanaged bad anger, perhaps, if we don't have a way to make sense of that and then reach for the person and repair.
Yeah.
Sometimes we find ourselves stuck in complicated dynamics and patterns and disconnected from the relationships that we value the most. At Repair Connections Counseling, we want to help you to interrupt, challenge, and repair what has been broken and reclaim what is rightfully yours, a life worth living. So give us a call today and let us help you to repair.
I've heard you mention this before, and it's something that I thought through even for this topic. You've talked to me a lot about unhealthy narratives. Pretty much what you're explaining right now. Now, some people, they don't like to use that word, what triggers, right? Or because a trigger can be a trigger. Even saying the word trigger is a trigger, but what we're talking about is the heart behind our anger. And I've heard you talk a lot about unhealthy narratives, and three things that I've kind of seen when people have those unhealthy narratives kind of running is, one, they're just stuck in the I want my way. At the end of the day, I want my way. A desire, which is okay to have, turns into a must have.
Right. Overwhelmed. Real quick, just curious, like not curious, but one of the comments, sometimes that's like an overwhelming, like with this feeling of rejection, possibly. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, and so it gets in the way. It's clouds. That's one of those narratives that we run with.
Yep. And then we also, which we can all be familiar with, I'm the victim. I'm the one who was done wrong here. There's not even the possibility. Could it be not even the possibility that I did someone wrong, or that there was something that I'm not aware of that maybe played a part? Maybe it wasn't the main thing that drove this situation, but it played a part. So I only see myself as the victim, or like self-pity or self-righteousness type of mentality.
Right. Yeah. Another one of those kind of narratives that that come along with sometimes maybe being overlooked or not feeling important, you know what I mean, in terms of relationships in general. Yeah.
That attachment stuff that you like to talk about.
Of course, there it is.
Yeah.
It's all about relationships. Yeah. Yeah.
The other one is the I am God mode, as some people like to refer to it. We put ourselves in the seat of God. We think we know what's best, or instead of saying, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, we say, my kingdom come, my will be done. Wow. And so we're not willing to take counsel. We're not willing to consider anything. We're not even willing to consider that maybe our sense of justice is out of proportion in this moment, and we're sitting in the seat of God saying, God, I got this. I know what's best.
I got to make a way.
I got to make this happen. Your time is too slow for me. I've been waiting. I've been waiting patiently. Yeah. It's time. It's time for me to handle this. Yeah. And so, I want my way. I am the victim, and I am God. So those are some of the things I've seen that can be the heart behind anger when we're expressing it in unhealthy ways.
Yeah, and sometimes when those narratives get running, it's really hard to slow down. That's why anger is such a powerful emotion. Sometimes we get like flooded with all of these thoughts, all of these feelings all at one time. And it's really hard to slow down that freight train. You know what I mean? It's hard to slow it down. And so we just take action. And actually anger helps in that way, in a good way, in that although the action is not necessarily good, but I'm saying the root of anger is good in that way because it helps us to cease the threat. It helps us to fix the injustice. Like, if you think about us in the woods and we see a brown bear, we got to, cease the threat if we got our family behind us, you know what I mean? And so it gives us that energy to take action, right? And so emotional flooding helps us to kind of just like not think, but to act. And that's what anger does. And so it is important that, when it becomes out of control, that we have these moments of reflection to really question and be curious about why we responded in that way, so we can take assessment of those narratives so that they're not just these running freight train, if you will, in the backgrounds of our minds.
I think also when it comes to that, there's an internalization of anger, right? That we try to, when anger takes over, we can start to internalize. And in many ways, we think we're doing something good, but really what we're doing is we're suppressing it, as you said earlier. Now, how that, pulling that thread a little more, when you talked about the suppression, the ways that we show that suppression is by us being sarcastic, right? Or shutting down, or we're saying, no, we're not going to talk about this right now, but really we're running away from it, and we don't come back and readdress it. So I think those are also ways that when anger takes over, how we behave. It's not just you're flipping tables and throwing stuff or cursing somebody out. It shows itself in a lot of other ways than just that.
Yeah, which is a misnomer. You're right, because a lot of times our anger hasn't been or is not acceptable, or at least in our minds, it won't be allowed, right? Because like we're saying, there is a righteous anger, there is a good anger. We should be able to bring those things to the table in a healthy way, of course. But if we get a sense that it's not, we might suppress or we might mask it. And that often leaks out in the way we communicate, sometimes in passive aggressive ways and kind of circumventing the anger, but being, like you said, sarcastic or dismissive or, maybe saying one thing, but meaning another thing. You know what I mean? In that our partners or the people in relationship with us, whether it's a friend, even a child or a parent, they're going to pick up on that passive aggressive, tendencies.
You think you're hiding it,
right?
But everybody else sees it. And I know it's something that you've talked a lot about, not just in our words and what we're not doing, but even physically, those signs can be very clear to someone, that things that you don't have control over, that suppressing anger can bring, right? Like, a lot of different things. It could bring high blood pressure. It could bring that, to be honest, the Bible even talks about this, like someone can see it in your face. Your face is turning red now. Yeah. Maybe that shows a little more, us light-skinned folk, but it can just show up not just in just emotional ways, but even physically. That's, again, apparent to everybody else in the room. But it's also doing damage to you because you're not willing to address that anger that's going on. Yeah.
And even, emotional disconnection, meaning sometimes our relationships are hindered because of anger. You know what I mean? Especially if it's mismanaged and we begin to have these emotional outbursts and things like that. Because a lot of times when you are suppressing it, you are pushing it to the side. Unprocessed hurt alters our behavior. So we can try to mask it and push it away, but it's going to come out in some way. It's going to spill out. And then in those moments when it does spill out, our relationships are hurt or harmed as a result.
When you were saying that, I got a question for you, but I did want to say, and I was reminded when you were saying that point, David said himself, he was like, man, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away. Wow. And so again, we can have a false sense of humility thinking we're being humble by not addressing something, but meanwhile, internally, just destruction is happening.
Right. Yeah.
But you said something that made me think, when we're doing that, right? When I'm doing that, when we're doing that, what is like a cost that can happen, like around us in our interpersonal relationships when we're not addressing our anger in a way that we should or not handling it appropriately? What have you seen that can happen in those relationships around us?
One simply is one or two things. One, there's either going to be distance because I'm suppressing, I'm going to go away and try to handle it on my own. And so I'm probably using that by distractions. I'm probably using that by overworking. I'm probably, maybe golfing more days out the week than I normally would. I'm doing a lot of things to vent that frustration or get my needs met outside of the relationship. And so there becomes this emotional distance, right? Perhaps another way is I start to pursue or be more, for lack of a better word, aggressive within the relationship because I am upset and I am being passive aggressive. It's coming out in this way of frustration. And so I might be more demanding and critical and these sorts of things, which pushes my partner away.
And meanwhile, they have no clue sometimes what's going on.
Right. None.
Now sometimes people are very aware. You may not think that they're aware, but they see it. And reminds me of the scripture says, make no friendships in Proverbs, make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare.
Wow.
So oftentimes people are, you're having this anger, you're responding to people in a certain way. And man, to be honest, they're trying to be obedient to the scripture. Like, hey, it's not good to be around you. And so again, back to what we was talking about, you're looking around at everyone else saying, yeah, nobody wants to be my friend. People are dropping like flies. Nobody wants to, when I send them an invite to go hang out, people don't want to go. It may be because you haven't been addressing your anger, or they've brought it up to you and you're just ignoring those things. You think it's again, victim mode. It's everyone else. It's what you did to me. I didn't do anything. And that can make people, like you said, push away from you and could just hurt relationships.
Yeah, everybody doesn't want to be entangled in your snare of anger, like you're saying, because oftentimes anger does beget anger.
Don't pull me into it.
Right. If I get upset, it's likely going to cause this alarm sense inside of you, and you're going to get upset. Then we're going to be, fighting, beefing.
Yeah. Why do we do that? Where we're uncomfortable being angry sometimes alone. It's like, no, you got to join me on this fight. Like, and we see that more with maybe couples. Like, man, if I'm mad, you mad. And I think even growing up, we probably did that. Like, listen, man, I don't mess with dude. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if I don't mess with him, you shouldn't mess with him. And it's like, man, hold on. Like, as we mature, you're like, man, that's your problem with. And matter of fact, you haven't even talked to the guy about it. Like, we're good. Like, I'm good with the individual. Why I gotta carry this beef with you?
Yeah.
So we're so quick to do that when it comes to relationships.
What that made me think of is sometimes we don't want to not just be alone in the anger, but we want to express how we feel. We want someone to know, hey, this means so much to me, but we're not communicating from that place. We're not saying, hey, man, I really feel deeply hurt. We're expressing it through anger. And so we think people are going to respond to that and say, oh, wait, that must have affected them. So I must do a thing. But they don't know that as I'm expressing my anger, it's causing then the other person's system and alarms to go off. So now they, distance themselves or they, do something in response to that. And now you say, well, why are you mad at me? Well, you set off the alarms in the other person, right? You didn't lead with that vulnerable means of communication that helps them to settle down and really see or hear you.
Yeah, and you do well talking about that's your cycles that you talk a lot about. And I know in an episode, we will have an episode where you kind of break that down a little more and talk about that, because that's definitely been helpful in my relationship as well, being able to identify that cycle that we can put each other in when we're dealing with different things.
Yeah. But with that, though, because we're talking about how, maybe we unhealthily process that anger. There are some healthy ways to process that anger.
Yeah, let's give some little pointers. What you got? What you got?
One of the things
what you got for us, Mr. Therapist?
One of the things that come to mind is a quote by a guy named Dan Siegel. Now, he uses this oftentimes when it's related to parent and child relationships, helping them to understand their emotions. But he often says you have to name it in order to tame it. And so I like to use that even when we're talking about
a little notepad when you be saying these little things. Go ahead. Say that one more time for me.
Got to name it to tame it.
Yeah.
I like to say that in reference to anger because once again, sometimes anger is like that freight train. It gets out ahead of us. It's hard to slow down. But if we can name those underlying feelings and emotions, if we can name that it's not just anger, but it's disappointment, it's, rejection, it's, other emotions that are under sadness or, things like that. If we can name it, then we can make sense that, oh, wait, this is actually what's underneath it all. And perhaps if it's safe, I can reach for my partner or my friend and say, hey, this is what's really going on, but behind it. And even that helps in the, the forgiveness and repair approach. If I can communicate that, then maybe my partner will be willing to forgive and reconcile.
Man, my alarms are going off, man. You done pushed my vulnerability button. That makes me feel uncomfortable. So does that require vulnerability to be able to name it? Because when we start naming things, I can say as a man, sometimes it's a little harder for us to put the name our different emotions that we're feeling or what we're going through in that moment. So you think that requires, I'm hoping you say no, but I know you're going to say yes.
Of course. Yeah. We talked about that in one of the last episodes. Of course, vulnerability is a risk, but man, like, of course it takes a vulnerable act to communicate that. I think you said in one of the last episodes, it takes humility to even take a step and look at that, because sometimes anger is the accepted emotion. That's the one that, gets the most praise at oftentimes. And so, yeah, man, it takes a humble approach to take a step back and look at that and then lean into vulnerability.
I know it sounds cliche, but one of the things that how I do for myself and encourage other people to process their anger is praying. Really before I engage and reach out and name it or even get to that conversation, or even maybe I know the conversation won't happen till a day or two or later in the day. Even while I'm in that process of waiting, I'm praying. I'm really, like we talked about earlier, like, God, is this anger or this feeling that I have right now, is this tied to your justice? Is this tied to your loving kindness? Is this tied to your patience? Is this tied to forgiveness? Or is this tied to my selfish ambitions? And so, and in while praying, giving space to hear the answer that no.
I think we jump over that a lot, that hearing part.
Because we feel like we already have the answer. I'm just checking this box, but I know what I'm about to do. Right. I know what I'm going to say. I know it's not me. So let me go ahead and now shift my prayer to God, change this person's heart. Or, versus like being really open to that. The Lord may say, no, you're the problem. It's you. It's your perspective. It's this,
Yeah.
And then now you're bringing it up to your loved one, a friend or a spouse, with a different heart posture. Right. That, like you said, now they're hearing something different versus an attack. they're hearing a heart cry,
Yeah.
a soul cry, and now they're able to better engage with whatever is going on with you internally. So praying, but then also, resisting the urge to use absolutes. You never, you always. We know how. Anytime, my wife knows, and I'm sure it's even for her, when we throw out those absolutes. Well, hold on, because I remember that time when
those criticized and attacking alarms. Yeah.
Yeah, we go back to now we're in a competition of remember this time, and we know most of the time women got better memories than us, so we lose that game. Or even if it's a friend, but you want to stay away from that, because more than likely that person, it's not a always. It's not a never. But let's talk about what it is today, right now, that I'm going through. So those are really one of the big things, is just starting with slowing down and praying and really seeking the Lord and searching and asking him to search your heart.
It made me think about a long time ago, and even recently, I read it from time to time, but this book by Gary Chapman called Anger, Taming a Powerful Emotion. And in that he talks about the difference between definitive anger and distorted anger. And what you're saying there about praying and hearing from God, it helps you to discern whether it's definitive anger, which means you have a right to be upset, like it was a boundary violation, it was something that was offensive, it was something that you ought to advocate for yourself for, like that's definitive anger. Or is it distorted anger? Maybe I'm perceiving things wrong, maybe I got ahead of it and I just reacted, you know what I mean? And so that praying helps us to slow down, connect with God, and discern between the two.
It takes time. Again, we especially nowadays, everything is rush. Everything is quick answer. Everything is, and if you're like me, you don't like elephants in the room. And it's like, nope, I'm not dealing with this elephant in the room. Let's address it now. And there is a step that I did skip over that I want to mention, is it's praying, but then also saying, hey, what does the word of God say about this?
Right. Yeah,
I need to, even if I think I know it, I want his word to speak to me to help redirect any thoughts that I may be having, or that this may be off in how I'm viewing this. Remembering in that moment that the Lord is a good host, right? He prepares a table before our enemies. And so he's a good host of our emotions. Yeah. And so those are two things that I pray. And what does the word say about our anger? But I know you wouldn't say just leave it there. It's kind of, okay, now that we're doing all those good things, we got to, at some point, especially if we realize like, hey, this is something that we really need to bring up, we got to communicate. We got to bring that up. Yeah.
Before we get there, though, I just love that, the Lord is a great host for our emotions, because as we talked about before, the vulnerability and repairing part, like God can handle our anger, but he could also handle the nervousness, the stress, the anxiety that comes with stepping out there and taking that risk, right? And so in that, we have to be able to then, with the right person, a spouse, our friend, our loved ones, communicate what's really underneath it, right? And so sometimes,
I like that.
I feel angry, I am angry, but hey, can we talk about what's going on underneath? Making those connections, trying to make those repairs. Yeah.
That's wonderful, man. You reminded me of a tool. Just telling the person, again, it takes vulnerability. Hey, I just want to be honest with you before I bring this up. I'm really nervous. I'm really. Right. I know I shouldn't be afraid, but I am afraid. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid that you're going to think of me a certain type of way. I don't know if that's right or wrong for me to feel that way, but I just want to be honest with you. This is what I'm feeling inside before I bring this up. And those are helpful, again, ways to disarm the person that and help us just on a practical level with our own nerves and fears.
Yeah. And it's an honest approach to where we are in that moment. And you're right. It makes that connection towards the other person in a way that helps them to maybe tune in and hear us rather than, be ready to react in a negative way. But yeah, man. So what I hear you saying in some ways, anchoring, it in love and grace, starting there, but creating a foundation to where we can then approach each other in a loving way.
Yeah. A man said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Wow.
Yeah. Assuming that communication is happening when really it hasn't.
It hasn't, right. Yeah. And we think that through anger, that it is taking place. Well, you knew how it affected me. You knew how it impacted me. Well, yeah, it was hard to hear through all of that. You know what I mean? That you was sad, you were disappointed, that you was hurt. It's funny, not funny, but it's always interesting when I see that in couples, when I'm working with them, is that they assume that because they had this reactivity that the partner knew what it was. But when you help them to slow down and really tease apart the underlying emotions like, sadness or disappointment or embarrassment, whatever it might be, it does help us to then, take that in and take hold of it. And sometimes that leads to the apology. It leads to the repair.
Yeah. You're storming around and you leaving the house and you're thinking that's a whole conversation, but it's not communicating. It could not be, possibly it could be communicating nothing to your loved one or your friend. So you got to use words in many situations. Your words matter.
Yeah, man, anger. It's a powerful emotion, man. But as we get closer to a close, I just want to say this, that, when handled well, I imagine I foot-stomped this, a lot throughout the episode, that anger, one, is not a bad emotion. It's what we do with anger that kind of complicates things. But it's not a bad emotion. It's something good. It primes us to create resolve, to create resolution, to respond when we have a sense of injustice. It gives us all the energy we need to cease a threat if necessary. But the challenge is there's not always a threat, right? So we have to be able to slow down and make sense of it so that we can take appropriate, healthy actions within our relationships. And so, just a key takeaway, find opportunity, find time to reflect. We don't always get it right, but we do need to take time to reflect and make sense of what's driving our anger. Because it's not always just anger. Sometimes it is that sadness, that disappointment, that deep hurt within this relationship or the context of relationships from the past that's driving us to protest or act or behave in a unhealthy way. But yeah, how about you? Any last words for our audience before as we close?
Yeah. So there was, as y'all heard, maybe if you watched the last episode, that one of the hats I wear is as a chaplain. And there was a lady that I visited with some time ago. And at this point in her life, she's bedridden. She's not able to feed herself. She's not able to just do a lot of the everyday things that we do that sometimes we take for granted. But she was telling me a story about when she was younger, when she was homeless and she was living under a bridge. And she just remembered just being angry every day, all day, from her mother, from her father, just everything that had led to this point to why she's living underneath a bridge and having to take care of herself. And she would go to school for herself and just was doing everything just on her own. And so one day she said that she was telling me this story. The room was really dark and she was looking at me with very intentional looking into my eyes. And she said, Terry, one time there was a guy who got off a train and he walked up to me and if you could imagine, like in the movies, what a hobo looks like, and this is the words that she used, having the stick and the scarf with holding his items. He just looked like what would come out of a cartoon or a movie. He came off the train and he came and sat down. And normally I'm hesitant, Terry, when I was in that world, to let anybody sit down or talk because I had to protect myself. I was worried about being taken advantage of. But there was something really pleasant and calming about this man that I told him that, you could sit down. And I began to just, for whatever reason, again, I didn't know why then, I began to express to him everything that I was just angry about and what led to me being here, how my mother forsaken me, my father had forsaken me. Nobody cared about me. People passed me by and don't speak to me. But then she said that the guy looked at her he paused, just stared at her for a little bit, and he asked her this powerful question. He said, "What has your anger done for you?"
Wow.
And she said in that moment, Terry, I had no answer. And I was getting really sleepy, and I didn't want to go to sleep because I was worried about, I wasn't all the way trusting this guy yet, but he just said, "Hey, go ahead and rest. I'll protect you." And I went ahead and decided to trust him, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up, I went to school, and he was still there. He was just watching me and protecting me. And so I went to school, and I felt this just release of my anger to where I was joyful. I was just thanking the Lord. And I was like, man, what has my anger done for me? What has it done for me? It's done nothing. It's done nothing for me. And so she said she ran back that day. She couldn't wait to get out of school. And when she ran back, the guy was gone. But from that moment going forward, she always asked herself, and it changed her life, where she became successful, started working for the military as a civilian.
Wow.
But she realized that my anger really hadn't done anything for me. That bad anger that I was holding on to.
Yeah.
And so my question to everybody that I hope one of the questions that you walk away with, that you're asking yourself is, what has your anger done for you?
What has your anger done for you? Man, such a powerful question that I'm even going to ask myself. Put that in the pocket and meditate on, what has my anger done for me? Has it helped relationships or hindered relationships? Man, I think that's a good place to pause.
Amen.
As we always say, until the
time.
next time. He is not your pastor, I'm not your therapist.
And in the words of the Apostle Paul, we urge you, brothers and sisters, to admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, and help the weak, and be patient with them all. Amen.